So thank you everybody for joining us today. And of course, those that are watching later and on Facebook, thank you for joining as well. We're really excited today to have Gail Walker from the Prince Edward County Master Gardeners to talk about how to have a great garden with less work. So that's something that I think, everybody who has a garden might like to know. So I will turn it over to Gail and just remind you to put your questions in the chat and we'll go through them at the end. So we'll turn it over to Gail. Thank you.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Let me just share my screen and get the presentation up. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to have a great garden with less work. I always kind of joke because my husband calls this "do what I say, not what I do." But basically, as I get older, I try to find ways to reduce the work that I'm going to have to do in the garden, and trying to get smarter about how I approach the chores. So let me introduce myself. I am a lifelong gardener. And I am a member of the Prince Edward County Master Gardeners Group. And we have a catchment area that includes all of the county and all of Hastings County. So we are wide ranging and will show up in all kinds of places with the mandate to help gardeners become better gardeners, know more about what they're doing, to educate the general gardening public on all topics of gardening. I live and garden in Lonsdale, Ontario, which is the top of Highway 49. If you continue just 6 kilometers north of the 401, you would come to my lovely village. And I've got about 3/4 of an acre, and most of it's perennial gardens. That is my personal focus. The first thing about getting out and gardening is hopefully it'll feel like less work if you're not hurting the next day. So my advice is to always start with a stretch. They can be gentle stretching exercises. You might have your own set of special exercises. I'm always making sure my back is healthy. So I've got certain ones that I do. But even just taking your morning cup of coffee and walking around your garden and admiring all of your work, and then making notes of what you want to do that day is a way to kind of get the muscles moving before you get into things. So I'm going to give you 25 tips on how to have a great garden with less work. And hopefully you will find something in here that helps. The first thing is plant selection, and that's basically all about getting the right plants in the right places. Okay. Now all of a sudden my screen doesn't want to move. There we go. So first tip is to plant more shrubs. As you're planning a garden bed, think about having 50 to 60% of the space devoted to shrubs. And that fills a lot of the space. It provides a lovely background for your flowers. Most shrubs will bloom at some point of the year, so it provides some interest. If about 1/3 of those shrubs are evergreen, you're also picking up winter interest so that it doesn't look so terribly bleak outside. The snow will look good resting upon them, but it also gives you some greenery during the winter time. Think about choosing shrubs where you like the natural shape and size of them so that you are not creating a pruning chore for yourself in the future. So you really want to minimize that part of the work. Second tip is to focus on perennials. And I like perennials because I only have to go through the hard work of planting them once. And then they stay in place for many years until either they need to be divided or they perhaps have died off and need to be replaced. Look for long blooming plants if you can. Perennials typically bloom anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks, and then the rest of the year they are green. So think about the long blooming plants, which would include things like catmint or tick seed, also known as coreopsis. Think about the foliage you choose for the perennials that you pick. They will come with different shapes, different leaf shapes. Not all greens are the same, so that you can have sort of a bluey green, a true green, a silvery green foliage. They could be spiky, they can be leafy. So there's all kinds of options there to give interest in your garden. I have a peony in the center of this picture, and I particularly think peonies are quite brilliant because they have a really eye-catching bloom in June of the year. And then the rest of the time, they are a lovely green, round, mounded shrub to be that backdrop in your garden. To minimize work, really be careful about how much you devote to annuals. Annuals are a lot of work. You've got to go and buy them, plant them, and remove them every year. They often need a lot more water than the perennials do because they have 1 year to show themselves off, and so they are quite needy from both water and fertilizing. They do give you a season-long pop of color, so they are in bloom from whenever they start right through to frost. But put them where you're going to get the most impact, so that you don't have them all over your garden, but put them where you might sit beside the patio, near the front door, so that you see it as you're coming in to the house, or people that are coming to your house will see it. And then think about what you look out of, which window you look out of the most. It might be your kitchen window when you're prepping food. It could be a window in your office, or at your favorite chair. So you want to have something that you look out at that is pleasing to the eye, but really, really be selective about where you put those annuals, because they're a lot of work. And don't go overboard with planters and hanging baskets. They look lovely, but you've got to show up every single day to water them. So if you're looking for less work, cut back on annuals. As you're buying your plants, I want you to think about and read the tag to consider each purchase very carefully. Understand what the space needs are for the plants. If you're picking a perennial, look at the mature size. They look tiny, tiny, tiny when you plant them, but they will get their elbows out and bulk up very quickly. So you don't want to have them in a space that's too small for them, and then you have to do more work by moving them. So think about the mature size of that plant also, so that you're not having to do a lot of pruning. There's many popular plants that come in dwarf varieties. So if you have a small garden and really love the look of the plant, but don't have a lot of space for it, look for the dwarf variation. So you'll see plants such as ninebark, which is a nice shrub that comes in both green and red foliage. That comes in a dwarf. There's small lilacs. Russian sage will come in something that only goes to 2 feet and not 3.5 feet. Weigela is another popular bush that comes with dwarf varieties, as well as the ones that will grow 6-8 feet tall. And also consider the light needs that each plant has. So make sure you plant the full sun plants in the full sun and the shade plants in the shade, and they will thrive all on their own with benign neglect. And you don't have to fuss over them and try to get them to flower for you. For this picture, I chose a hybrid tea rose and a wild rose. I personally have no more hybrid teas in my garden. I found them a lot of work. They're beautiful, they're fragrant, they're lovely, but they require pruning. They will get aphids that need to be picked off. They'll get black spot on the leaves, so you need to remove all of the leaves, whether they're on the plant or fallen on the ground around them. So you don't want the black spot to perpetuate. And then you're going to trim them back in the fall. Wild rose, you let them go, they bloom, then they form beautiful rose hips that look lovely right through the fall and winter. So they're the same kind of plant. One's a lot more work than the other. Next tip is to plant trees. Now, in many ways, you're planting trees for the future generation. You're not going to see them live to maturity, probably. You'll either you'll probably move to another location before that happens. So we have to be appreciative of the trees that were planted for us by other people. But even a small tree provides a great impression in the garden, takes up a fair bit of space, gives a place for birds to land, possibly to nest. They will be a screen against a view that you don't want to look at, maybe the side of your neighbor's house or something unpleasant that you'd rather not focus on. If you've got a large property, think about instead of having that field in front of your house, planting copses of trees where there's a grouping of trees, an island of trees, if you will, in the lawn. And you can take advantage of seedling offerings that come up in the spring. Tree the County is one source of those, where you will get, you'll literally get small whips that will grow into trees, but in no time at all, and in 3-4 years, you will suddenly have a small grove of trees coming up on your property. Another big chore in gardening is building a new garden bed. It's sort of backbreaking work. So here is some tips to lessen that. The first is to put all of your work into making a healthy soil. So the soil should be crumbly and hold moisture like a damp sponge. And we call that having tilth. It's neither sandy, where it would just run through your fingers, or clay, where it's a ball that you could make a pot out of. But it is a lovely mixture in between, the way Triple Mix comes out of a bag. And you're going to get that by taking the native soil, which will have all kinds of nutrients in it, and then adding a full 50% of organic materials to that. And by organic materials, I mean, it could be shredded leaves from last year, compost, manure, there's fish compost. You can buy it in bags at the nursery, or you can make it yourself. But get that mixture into the soil so that there's lots of nutrients that the plants can feed from, that the insect population and the worms can thrive in, so they can move through the soil, make their deposits, and help the plants grow to be big and strong. So I know it sounds like a lot of work, and it doesn't sound like less work, but by doing this up front, you pay yourself dividends for years. If you're putting in a new bed, consider a no-dig flower bed. There's many approaches. The one I've shown here is called a lasagna garden, where you put down a layer of cardboard over your old lawn, and then put down progressive layers, the same as if you were building a pan of lasagna, where you have some green garden waste, some brown garden waste, some compost, and then ultimately topping it with mulch. So you're just putting down layers of green and brown to get it to be a good 6 inches thick or 6 inches high. and then topping it with the compost and mulch that you can plant into. A faster method can be, and you have to leave that there for 3, 4, or 5 months so that it starts to break down. So you maybe would start building these gardens in the fall for planting the following spring. A faster method is to make a sharp cut in your lawn to define your edges. Then add a layer of corrugated cardboard, wet it down quite thoroughly, and then put triple mix right on top of that. Then you can plant it that day and then mulch the top of it. If you are building the bed and you don't have the time or energy to plant it right away, get the mulch on so that the weeds don't start to grow in that fresh soil. You can always push the mulch to one side on planting day. Raised beds are another great option, and they're particularly lovely for vegetables. There's no need to disturb the existing soil at all. And there's lots of kits and plans available online for raised beds. This one has wood sides. I've seen them with interlocking paver sides, where they have actual slabs of pavers that are long like planks. You can do them in old watering troughs as well. And then when you're working the beds, the soil is up from the natural ground level. You're very unlikely to get weeds in these beds. And then just mulch in between them so that there's no care between them, but you're suppressing any weed growth. And speaking of weeds, that's the chore nobody wants to do. So here's some tips. One is to plant densely. These are shots from my own garden, and you can see the sedum at the top are planted closely enough that they are literally a single mass. They've got a continuous canopy so that there's no light getting down to any weed seeds that fall there. Have a very poor chance of growing and thriving. The other shot is more of a long shot of my rather large rock garden that's on a hill. And you can see that there's no bare earth showing. All of the plants are quite close together, and that helps to crowd out the weeds. When I'm putting plants in, I look at the mature size and then I plant them slightly closer than what the mature size would suggest. So if it's 24-inch spacings, I might put them at about 20, 21-inch spacings. And that way they'll interconnect faster. Under shrubs, you might want to consider putting in a natural mulch or a living mulch. And these would be low growing perennials that will cover the ground, keep it nice and moist, and choke out any weeds that might want to take a hold there. Examples of these living ground covers would be things like creeping thyme, creeping phlox, sweet woodruff. These are plants that will take a light amount of foot traffic, will fill in very nicely and look lovely and lush and green, and again provide that living mulch. Be aware when you're looking for these types of ground cover. The nurseries are still selling, unfortunately they're still selling some alien invasive species that you really don't want to put into your garden. Those would be things like creeping jenny, bugleweed, lamium. These are plants that escape your garden, unfortunately, and get into the natural areas and are creating quite a problem in the province of crowding out native shrubs. So you want to get a native ground cover for your living mulch. Whatever you do, though, don't have any bare soil. So not everybody likes the aesthetic of a crowded garden like mine are. Some like it to be each individual plants so that they can appreciate each one. And that's fine, but just make sure that you cover all of the soil with mulch. You're doing that to keep the soil moist, to keep it cool in the summer. Any weed seeds that are already in the soil won't get any light to germinate. Any weed seeds that drop into the mulch are going to be much easier to pull than anything that's in the actual soil, because the roots can't get as much purchase. Make sure you use an organic mulch. Shredded bark would be my go-to mulch. I'm not a big fan of wood chips in a flower bed. The mulch, it's the shredded bark will work its way into the soil over the years. You're going to need to top it up each year, but it will break down reasonably quickly and improve soil health. So it's a good thing. I'm not really fond of the black mulch because I think it has a lot of solar gain in the summer and it can be a little too hot for the plants. But that is very much an aesthetic choice of the gardener. And straw is a great mulch for vegetable beds. And again, that can be just dug into the beds at the end of the season. If you want to have less work, plan your weeding based upon the weather. So if you weed at the right time, it's a lot less work. So after a nice rain, when we get a half of an inch a day, that's a super time to go out and go after the weeds that have a taproot, like the one that's on the right here. And they will, you want to get the whole weed out, the whole root out, so that you weed once and it's gone. So that'll come out quite easily after a rain. For fibrous roots, they tend to grab onto the soil a bit more. So if you've had a half inch, you might want to leave 2 or 3 days before you go out and actually weed those. So they want a little bit of not too wet, not too dry soil. And if you want to control nature and weed when it's convenient for you, I'll often water the night before. If I know there's a specific area of my garden I want to get the weeds out of, I will put the water on for maybe 2 hours over a large area. And I know the next day those weeds will come out like a charm. And whatever you do, everybody gets weeds. It's going to happen, but don't let them bloom. At least at minimum, cut off the blooms so they're not setting a seed and giving you 150 more weeds for next year. So ideally pull them before they bloom, but if you can't get them that fast, then at least cut off their pretty little heads. Caring for lawns is another area that is a lot of work. So here are some thoughts for you. Think of grass as a choice and not a default setting. So a phrase that I've recently read that I quite like is think of it as an area rug and not broadland. Plan specific spaces that need to have grass. So you're going to need to have an open space, perhaps to highlight your garden beds so that they look lovely and there's a nice green lawn in front of them. Any place that children are going to play, make sure that they have an area of green. If you like to walk in bare feet, it's lovely to have a green space. But then do something else with the rest of the space, something that will take a lot less work. On small lots, you can, in the backyard, say, have quite a spacious patio or deck, whatever suits the area, and then just soften all the edges with garden beds filled with those shrubs, perennials, and a couple of annuals. I have a second house in Toronto, in Midtown Toronto, and I do not have a single blade of grass there. Everything is in planters. And people still stop and compliment me on how nice the gardens look in front of my house, not a blade of grass. If you have a large lot, if you're on a 2-acre lot, stop thinking that you own Downton Abbey. You do not need a huge swath of green grass. So unless you have the English rain and a flock of sheep, it's going to be a lot of work to be out there cutting it for hours at a time every week. So define a smaller yard around your house, something that is far more manageable, where you will actually want to work on the gardens, where you'll see the nice lawn, and then everything beyond that yard, which you can set up as a fence for the barrier, or shrubs, or however, a driveway, anything, and then make the rest just a natural meadow. Allow all of the native plants to grow. It's wonderful for the ecology. It will continue to look green, and possibly greener than a lawn looks in the middle of the summer. If you like to go walking, think about just mowing a wide path through that natural area. It'll allow you to walk a dog, or just go for a walk yourself, and minimize any tick risks if you have like a 6 to 8 foot pathway going through, and then you still can appreciate all of the wildflowers. In a small lot, you might want to replace the grass with steppable plants. And that's particularly true if you look at the lower photo, where it's a side yard, and it's very hard to keep grass in a side yard. It's a lot of maintenance, but you can put down a couple of stepping stones there, and then put down plants that will take light foot traffic. And they will be rated as such, usually on the plant tag, but anybody in the nurseries can help you with that. So some examples of that would be Scotch moss, Irish moss, creeping thyme, a low-growing sedum, plants in that category. And then for really high traffic areas, you can put in white clover. It's a wonderful plant. It puts nitrogen back into the soil. It's a food source for the bees. It comes with one caveat, though. I would not use white clover where I had children playing in the grass, because those bees are not necessarily friendly bees when you are in their territory. And if you're a big fan of walking in bare feet, again, I wouldn't encourage a lot of white clover, because you wouldn't want to step on a bee and get stung. I'll encourage you to have good mowing practices to reduce your work, and that is use a mulching blade. That way you don't have any raking. Once you've cut the grass, sometimes if it gets a little long, it's just flopping on the lawn, and it turns brown and looks ugly. You're also naturally putting those clippings back right. The clippings fall down to the soil level, they decompose, they put nitrogen back into the soil, which helps feed the lawn and makes it thicker. Your target is to have the grass about 3 inches tall. That'll keep it, help keep the soil moist. You're helping to shade that soil. And in that way, it'll stay a little bit greener, a little bit longer during any droughts. Cut circles around your trees and large shrub areas so that you don't have a lot of string trimming work to do. You'll also protect against any damage to the bark of the trees. You should be able to run your mower right to the edge of those circles, and again, make a lot less work. As you get close to your flower beds, think about defining the edges. You can put in permanent strips that could be pavers, or a narrow concrete strip you can have put down if you're doing major landscaping. And it's set so that the one wheel of the lawnmower can run along that paving strip, and you don't have to do any edge work at that point. Another alternative to a permanent strip is to look at keeping a very clean edge on your beds. That's a once a year chore. First time you do it, it's pain, absolutely. Once you've done it, just maintaining it is not a lot of work. It makes the beds look like $1 million. The lawnmower can again go right to the edge, and that's an area where I will use mulch in my flower beds, is right along the edge, to create a barrier so that the turf, the grass, can't grow into the flower beds, and vice versa, the plants can't grow into the lawn. So I'm making a clear dividing line and keeping the work less as a result of that. And for your lawn areas, make sure you overseed annually. You do that in either the spring or the fall or both, and it'll give you a nice, dense, healthy turf that the weeds can't grow up in. And do make sure that as you choose your grass seed, you consider the light conditions so that you get the right grass for a shady area versus a sunny area. Another big task is watering. So I'm going to encourage you to think about having soaker hoses that you can leave in place throughout the season. They will work well to keep the foliage dry when you're watering, and they can be put on timers so that you can get the watering done at dawn or late evening when it is best and the foliage won't be wet during the sunlight hours where it can burn off and harm the plants. And you can basically set and forget until you get into a particularly rainy spell. Drip irrigation is a wonderful idea for all of the deck plants that you might have. There's kits available where you can set it up as per the drawing on the screen. And again, you could set those on timers if you want to, but it gets rid of the daily task of having to go out and water your plants. You just know that they're being cared for. Choose drought tolerant plants so that you can water less often. Most of these plants only need water when we get into a summer drought. And native plants are obviously drought tolerant because they've survived without us, so they will survive without us in the garden as well. And examples of those are coneflower, ornamental grasses, native honeysuckle. The pink one is a big root geranium. The orange butterfly bush, and of course hostas are known to be bulletproof and quite drought tolerant. And when you do have to water so that you are watering very deeply and for less often. And what you want to do there is make sure that the grass and the plants are developing deep roots. That helps them withstand the drought. And of course, it's less work for you because you don't have to set up the sprinkler as often. When you're actually getting into garden planning, big advice is to be selective about where you put your gardens so that you are putting them where you're going to see them the most and most appreciate the work that you're going to do. So that's going to be around the seating areas, the entry to your home, and again, the views from your windows. When you see a scene like the one I have here, it's time for a path. So consider how you move around your property, and anywhere that there's a high traffic area, it's a place to put in a permanent path, something again you do once and it's done, and then you don't have to worry about it. Think about choosing the right surface. You might want to have a hard surface plant, a hard surface paver or concrete or stepping stones for a place where there is just a lot of traffic. That could be maybe the pathway to a shed or the garden storage area, or where you might keep your recycling. And then in a shady area where you might see this kind of bare spot, think about having just a mulched path where you put on a nice thick layer of mulch and you can walk on that without having to worry about, oh, I've got to fix that grass. And then finally, last tip, number 25, is to resist fall cleanup. And this is the biggest labor saver of all. Many of us started gardening when you just absolutely cleaned up every leaf and cut back every perennial for the winter. And the new thinking is that we don't do it at all. Leave the spent foliage to decompose in place and start feeding the soil in the garden. The beneficial insects in our gardens are overwintering in the leaf litter. They're overwintering in the hollow stalks of plants. And we really encourage you to leave that in place until the days are consistently at 10 degrees centigrade. So it's not yet time to be in your garden, unless you're maybe picking up sticks from the windfall or something like that. But leave the litter. I know it hurts. You really want to make it nice, but just leave it for another couple of weeks. One benchmark for me is if I'm driving at night and I get a bug splat, then I know the bugs are out of that litter and getting on with their lives, and I can get back to my gardening. So leave that and let yourself relax, knowing you're doing a good thing for nature. So that's it. Now you can relax and enjoy. And I'll just finish off with a little bit more about the Prince Edward County Master Gardeners. We're always available to answer your gardening questions. You can reach us through our website, through Facebook, and through email. And we will get back to you in short order to answer your questions. If you have a specific question, we might seek out the Master Gardener with the most experience in that particular area. And I'd like to let everybody know that we're going to be returning to our annual plant sale, which is held, other than during COVID, it's held every year in Picton at the parking lot of the Metro grocery store. And we'll be there on May 28th from 9 till, I guess, noon. And all of the Master Gardeners bring treasures from our gardens to sell, and it's our major fundraising for the year. So with that, I'll take any questions if you've got any.
I know I, for one, found that very interesting. And I'm not a gardener, but a lot of the things that you recommended, I accidentally do. So that was kind of encouraging to know that, you know, not cleaning up the leaves and so on is not so bad after all. I always like to hear that. But if anybody has a question in the chat, put it in the chat and I will read it out loud for you. I'm sure everybody has lots to think about and probably feeling inspired to get out and get going. Okay, we have our first question. Cynthia asks, are you aware of any plants that chickens don't like? I discovered too late that they love hostas.
No, you're going to stump me there. I've never heard of anybody having a specific chicken problem, but I will take a guess that anything that has a scent to it, so anything in the mint family, will be a particular non-favorite of most animals. They don't like that smell.
I think I've heard that about rodents as well, if you have a rodent issue. Is that right, that mint is another deterrent?
Yeah, yeah.
Are all mints invasive, she asks?
No. There's a lot of fragrant plants that are part of that mint family that they're not invasive. If you take the herb mint, absolutely it's invasive. That's a plant that you always put in the garden in a pot, and don't let it escape from that, or you will have an entire garden of mint and nothing else. But most of the plants, like catmint, is not invasive, for instance.
She says thank you. And if anybody else has questions, you can certainly put them in the chat. Speaking of mint, remember when I moved into my first place and planted mint and called my mom over and said, look, I've got a garden. And she was very alarmed to see that I had planted mint right in the center. But, you know, you live and learn.
You live and learn.
We pulled it out before it was too much of a problem.
Oh, good.
Says, thank you very much. Lots of great ideas. So I'll just remind everybody this will be on YouTube later. So if you want to review, you can check it out or share it with a friend. And if we have any more questions, I will happily read them. And otherwise, we'll thank you, Gail, for joining us, and remind everybody that we have on Thursday the 7th, Colette McKinnon will be talking about compost and soil, which are the building blocks of a healthy garden. And I think you should have mentioned that in your talk as well, Gail, how important it is. So thank you.
So Colette will give you the tips on how to get there.
Which is wonderful. So same process, register if you haven't already online, and we'll do it just the same as this.
Great.
We've got lots of thank yous, but I don't see any further questions. So thank you, Gail. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming.
Okay, thank you.